Hi, my name's Stuart Lynch, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to the new BottomSheet PresentationDetents modifier that was introduced in iOS 16. This gives us the ability to control the height of our modal sheets. Now this may seem like a pretty straightforward topic, but there are a lot of things that you need to be aware of, so I'm going to introduce you to a number of related topics so that your apps will look good to everyone that uses your app. I'll introduce you to the detents and all of their options, and we'll create a custom view modifier to optionally add a close button to any one of our modal sheets. We'll also look at different sheet view presentation overloads, and finally how we can create our own custom detent. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. There is a starter project for this video, and I recommend that you download it from the link in the notes below. You must make sure that you are using Xcode version 14 or higher. And at the time of this video, I'm using Xcode Beta 4. The project has a tab view with 4 tabs. Each tab simply has a button or two that will allow us to initiate the presentation of a modal sheet. I've provided 4 other views with varying amounts of text as content, and that's reflected in the view name, and we'll be using those throughout the video. We want to make sure that when we present our sheets that we can provide the user with a way to access all of our content no matter what the orientation or accessibility setting the user has chosen. First, let me show you the basics. We have 2 different ways of initiating a presentation of a modal sheet in SwiftUI. Let's start with the most familiar, and that's to bind the presentation to a Boolean value that we can toggle to true to initialize the presentation. So let's start with a state property that I'll call showSheet and set it to false. Then for the button action, I'll just toggle that value. We can then attach a sheet modifier to our VStack using the isPresented constructor. If you have a function with the same name that has different implementations, this is often known as function overloading. So we often refer to the constructor as the overload. So I'm using then the isPresented overload here. I'll bind that to the showSheet state property, and I'm going to present my medium content view. This is nothing new here. It's what we've always been able to do. And when we tap on our button, we get this sheet presentation in SwiftUI. The view pops up from the bottom to near the top of the view, and we can drag it down to dismiss. What has changed with Xcode 14 is the ability to add presentation detents. With the presentation detent modifier on a view, you can specify how high up you want to display your view from the bottom. And this requires a set of supported detent types. The simplest are the medium and large detents. So let's just start with just medium, and it's a set, so we'll include it in our angle brackets. You see now that the view only gets presented partway up, and it can go no further. Again, you drag down to dismiss. With presentation detents, you can have multiple options in your set. So let's add large. This time you'll note that there is a drag indicator added to the view to signify to the user that you can drag this up or down. There's really no need to have the second large detent here because the content fits nicely into the small size. But if we change our sheet to large content sheet, let's see what happens. Now, when first presented, we see only some of the text. And there is a ... at the end indicating there is still more to see. So when we drag up, all of our content is displayed. Let's return to just the medium content sheet here in detent. And I want to rotate our phone to see what happens in landscape mode. Well, when the phone is in landscape, the sheet view is automatically transformed into a full sheet view and covers the entire screen. And there's no way to dismiss our view. This is a problem if you support landscape on your iPhone, so we'll need to deal with that. In fact, there's one school of thought out there that says you should always provide your users with a dismiss button on Modal Sheets, because not everyone knows that you can drag down to dismiss, even in portrait mode. So let's add a close button to our view. And there are a couple of ways to do this, and in this video I'll show you what I do. First, I'm going to use an overlay button. So what I'll do is create an environment dismiss property. So within this view here, that's our sheet, I'll create the environment with the dismiss key path, and that will be my variable dismiss. Next, I'll enclose my current view within a Z stack or a Z stack. Then, in the frontmost view, I'll create a color view that is clear. And then I can overlay that with an alignment of top trailing, a button, where the label uses the system name x.circle.fill. And I'll set it to a large scale. And I'll give the button some padding. Then for the action, I can simply call the dismiss function. Returning now to our basic view, I see that when I tap the button, I have this close button on my sheet, so I can use it to dismiss the full cover sheet. Let me switch now back to portrait mode. In testing, I see that the button is there as an added benefit as well. Well, this is great, but I don't want to have to add this button to all of my other views that I might be presenting. Seems like a lot of duplicated work if I have to do that. And this is where SwiftUI view modifiers come in handy. I have an entire video on this topic, and I encourage you to check it out, as I'm not going to go through it in great detail here. I'll leave a link in the notes below. So first, we'll create a new file called Sheet Modifiers. And in that new file, I'm going to import SwiftUI. I'll create a new struct, and I'm going to call it Dismiss Button Modifier. And I'll have to conform it to the ViewModifier protocol. Well, this will require a body function that will accept the content presented and then return some other view. So for example, if I just return content, this view modifier will do absolutely nothing. But this is any content that it might receive, like any one of our sheet views. So we can do exactly here what we just did for that individual medium sheet view. First, we'll embed in a Z stack. Next, we can create the dismiss environment variable here. And then, if I return to my medium content view, I can cut out that clear color and button and return our view to where it was before I added this button overlay. And then we can take that we cut out and paste that right in the top of our modifiers Z stack. There's one more thing I should do to make this whole experience more Swift-like, and that's to create an extension for view. And inside there, I'll create a function that I'm going to call with dismiss button that will return some view. Then I can just specify that the view as self is applied the modifier dismiss button modifier. Returning to the basics view, then we can attach this new view modifier to our medium content sheet. Testing, we see that it behaves exactly as before. Let me change the sheet to a large content sheet and add a second detent. Testing, I see that that close button now appears on the large content sheet too. I didn't have to touch the sheet itself. Now, what happens if I have more content even than this though? So let me change the view to really large content sheet and test. Now, when we get to the large content, we still don't see all of the content in our sheet. So let me return to the sheet modifier, and I'm going to add a new property that I'm going to call with scroll. That's a Boolean. Next, I'm going to turn the entire Z stack into a constant that I'll call view. Then we can specify that if with scroll is true, we can embed that entire view into a scroll view. Else, we'll just return the view as before. We'll also need to modify our extension function by adding a with scroll property as a function parameter, but we can default it to false, which is our current implementation. Then we can pass that on to the ViewModifier. If I build now, everything's fine because nothing has changed. It's accepting the default, therefore our ViewModifier will just return the regular view, modified with the button. We still don't see the full content. However, if I add the with scroll property to our ViewModifier and specify true, now when I tap on the button and get up to the large detent, I can continue to scroll to see all of the content. Moving on now then to our second tab, let's explore some other presentation detent types. There are 3 other detent functions besides medium and large. 2 of them have additional arguments that are CG floats. One is a fraction where you can specify what fraction of the current view you wish to rise up, and the second allows us to specify an exact height. So, like our first example, let's use the isPresented overload, which requires a state Boolean property that we can toggle with our button. Again, let's attach a sheet modifier then bound to show sheet. Let's specify a large content sheet this time. And then we'll apply our with dismiss button here, but without the scroll. And then we'll provide a set of presentation detents. I'm going to add 3 in our set. First will be the fraction detent, and I'll specify a fraction of 0.2. Second will be a fixed height, and I'll specify 600. And then finally, I'll specify just the large, which will take it up to the top. When I test now, the initial rise is up 20% of the height of the screen. I'll drag up again and it'll stop at 600 pixels. And then finally, I can drag up to the top to get to the large detent. In the next example, I want to show you how to deal with having more than one sheet on a view. So in this case, I want to use the item overload on our sheet function. And you can see that I want to present either a medium or a large sheet. For the medium sheet, I'm going to present the medium detent, but for the large, I want both medium and large. Now, I have a video on this technique that I'm going to show you now, and I'll leave a link in the description below. And this is what I do. First, I'll create a new file called Modal sheet type. And inside here, I'm going to import SwiftUI. I'll create an enum with the same name, but I'll make sure that it conforms to both identifiable and to view. And there will be 2 cases, medium and large, that will represent my medium and large views. Now, to conform to identifiable, I'll create an ID property that is a computed int, and then I'll simply return 0 if the case is medium, and 1 otherwise. Now, because it conforms to the view protocol, we'll need a body property that is SomeView. Well, I can switch on self, and in the case of medium, I'll simply return the medium content sheet. And in the case of a large, I'll return the large content sheet. So back in the multi-sheet view now, we need to create a new state property that's not a Boolean, but rather an optional multi-sheet type. And I'll just call it multi-sheet type. Then for our action buttons, we can trigger the presentation of a sheet by assigning a value to this property. So for example, in the medium content sheet, I'll just assign it the value medium. Similarly, for a large content sheet presentation, we'll assign it .large. Next, we attach a sheet modifier, but this time we'll use the item overload and bind it to our modal sheet type. And this will provide us with a modal sheet enum case that I can call sheet. But remember, this enum conforms to the view protocol, so it's actually going to give us a view. So we can add the with dismiss button modifier here. And then we can add a presentation detent, but we can specify which ones we want based on whether or not the sheet is a medium or large sheet. If it's medium, we only want the medium detent set. If it's large, we want both medium and large. With that in place now, I can test, and as I tap on either one of the buttons, I see that I get my corresponding sheet, and if it's the large one, I get the two detents that allow me to go from the medium to the large detent. For our final example, I want to show you how to create a custom presentation detent that will satisfy accessibility needs where your users may use large font sizes. I learned this by reading a blog post from Natalia Panfernova on her NilCoalescing blog. I highly recommend that you read this blog. Natalia is a former Apple employee that worked on the SwiftUI team, so she has lots of wonderful content to share. Let's first see what the issue is. In this final view, let's go back to the isPresented overload and use a showSheet Boolean property and toggle it in our button. As usual, create a sheet modifier using the isPresented overload and bind it to our showSheet property and present the tiny content sheet. Let's also add a dismiss button. For the detent, let's return a height of 60. This looks pretty good in the preview, but for our testing, I'm going to have to run in the simulator. Even though I can adjust the sizing of our font in a preview, for some reason it doesn't carry through to subviews like the sheet view. You see I'm in dark mode now. When I present this view, it looks fine. But let's move this aside so that we can see both our simulator and Xcode. And then in Xcode, I want to enable dynamic type. Let's show the sheet once more and start to increase the type. Pretty soon you see that this view doesn't handle the button very well, and it's overridden by the text. Also, if you get too large, the 60 height just isn't good enough. So we have two problems to solve. First, let's take another approach to our ViewModifier button. Let's create a new ViewModifier. And this time I'm going to call it Navbar Dismiss Button Modifier. And it too has to conform to the ViewModifier protocol. As with the other one, it requires the body function that we can return our content. But I'm going to embed this inside a navigation stack. As before, we'll create the dismiss environment variable. But I'm also going to create a title property that we can use. And it's a string. Well, now that we have a string, we can use that to set the navigation title. and we'll pass it in when we call this view. I also want to set the navigation bar title display mode to inline. And then I can create a toolbar, and inside there, one toolbar item, and the placement will be navigation bar trailing. And here we'll just put the button the same as we had in our first view modifier. For the extension then, we'll create another function like the first, but I'll call it with dismiss navbar, and it's going to require us to pass in a title property. And then we can apply the navbar dismiss button modifier with that title to self. Now switching to our custom view, we can change our modifier to use the with dismiss navbar modifier. And we'll pass in a title like the string tinyView. Let me run this on the simulator once more. This time, when we adjust our dynamic type, our button is in the navigation bar and away from the body. But we still have to solve the problem about the type not fitting though, and this is where Natalia's post has helped me out. I'm going to create a new detent type. So I'm going to create a new file called tinyDetent. I'm going to change the import to be import SwiftUI, and then I'll create a struct of the same name, tinyDetent, that conforms to the custom PresentationDetents protocol. I can let Xcode fix the conformance, and it'll create a static height function. This function receives the view context, and we must return a CG float that will be the new height of our sheet. Now this context has access to our view context, and one of these is the dynamic type size. So we can simply switch on that. And after some experimentation, I found that I only need to start increasing the height of the view if we start to exceed the accessibility to dynamic type size. And in that case, I return a much larger 180. Then, for each of the different sizes after that, up to the highest level, 5, I'll increase the height by 20 each time. And then for the default, I'll just return that previous 60 that will work with all other sizes below the accessibility 2. Then, to make it more Swift-like, I'll create an extension on the PresentationDetents. And in here, I'll create a static property called tiny that's equal to self, with a capital S, using a custom tinyDetent type, lowercase self. Now back in custom detent, I can change my PresentationDetents to be just the tiny one. Now remember that if there is only a single detent, we don't get that drag indicator in our view. Well, I can change that if I want. And I can do that by specifying that the presentation drag indicator is visible. Let's test this now in the simulator. I'll bring up my dynamic type changer, and the type grows as I move to the right, but as soon as I get to accessibility level 2, the height starts to change. And it increases as I move forward. As I move back again and go below accessibility level 2, we'll remain at a fixed height of 60. Well, that was a lot of different information that we had covered in this tutorial. And hopefully you have found it helpful and can use some or all of these techniques in your projects. Make sure please that you leave a comment below if you enjoyed it, and give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. And tweet about it so others can find this content too. Thanks so much for watching.